Almost live from the CX Therapy Studio, CX Therapy Season 4.
Morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to yet a new season of the CX Therapy. Happy New Year. We haven't talked since 2023. Welcome to 2024. Welcome to our new CX Therapy studio. For you guys this year, we have loads of new things. We have new format. We have new frequency. We have tons of new stories. We have a lot of surprises, but there is one thing that will not change, and that is the fact that I'm sharing the CX Therapy couch with my partner in crime. Please help me welcome the one and only Max Paul. Morning, Max.
Wow, there's so much to see around here. This is a whole new set. Look at this. We got cameras, we got action, we got light. This is beautiful. I'm so excited to do this.
Big budget, right?
Big budget. That's right. Both dollars.
So, how was your New Year? Happy New Year, Max. How are you doing?
Happy New Year to you. It was good. We did the family thing and just we did make it to midnight. Very proud. How about you?
I did make it to midnight too. I didn't get wasted. I'm getting old for these things. I feel. And I don't even think I have a New Year story for you, which happens to be good because we're changing the format. So I would not really hit you with a story right away. So I guess from that perspective, we good, right?
Yeah, we're good. We'll just check the had a good New Year box and move on with life.
That sounds good. Actually, what I'd like to start with this week, this month, this year, this new season, is a little did you know session. I think let's set the tone a little. Does that work for you?
It works for me. I knew this was coming, so I guess yes, I know, and I'm into it. Let's do it.
So let's start with the did you know section. And for this week, I'd like to check with you about a super important topic, at least one that I consider to be super important, which is the gap between consumer perception and brand perception. Something that you're definitely very familiar with. Do you mind if I share a few stats with you?
Oh, please do. Please do. As long as we can carp about them after we see them.
Oh, definitely. Oh, I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say about it. Look, here is the data I've got for you. This is a gap between what contact center managers believe and what consumers believe. And on three different topics. The availability of a human agent, 80% of contact center managers believe they are at least meeting expectation, if not exceeding expectations of their customers. 80% of them against 37% of customers. When it comes to response speed, we got 84% of managers believing they are exceeding or meeting customer expectation against only 45% for actual customers. And when it comes to customers feeling heard and understood, we have almost 80% of managers believing they do the job just right against 45% of customers. That data is fairly fresh, right? It's Calabrio's research published end of 2022, so it's a year old. What do you think? What do you make of that?
These numbers are stark in how far apart they are. This difference of how a brand feels they're doing and how their customers feel they're doing is something I see a ton of. One of the things, if you've ever watched a webinar I do, a lot of times people want me to talk about, of all things, customer experience. Who knew? And looking at how people feel about it. At Forrester, we have something called the Customer Experience Index, where we interview 10,000 people a year about how they feel about brands and all this gory detail stuff. But one of the things we do is just, how do you rate your experiences as a customer from bad to very good? And I forget the details of the different spots in between. And it's a bell chart, just big surprise. But one of the things I found doing podcasts is if I ask the brands that, the bell chart is almost exactly the same in terms of the numbers and everything. It's just the brands are one level more positive, and the customers themselves are off more negative on it. And it's become a sight gag that I do because it's so consistent. These numbers are worse than what I see. This is just what I'm going to ask you. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy here?
Well, I would probably say that managers, they are seeing the customer experience from their corporate lens. You look at statistics, you look at charts, you look at numbers, you're pretty happy with all the things that you deploy. But that's not actually experiencing things. That is very theoretical. I think customers, they live and breathe the actual experience, and that makes a gigantic difference. I mean, once you get into the customer's shoes and you're actually trying to get that same experience, you see things very differently. I think that's
I think there's a huge lesson here. If you are, if you own any part of the customer experience, why aren't you going and experiencing that at least once a week? Unless it's like flying around the world or something where it's just not practical to do it.
Which you're kind of doing.
It's
yourself.
Yes.
Which
yes.
you're kind of doing.
If somebody's got to do it, I'm happy if it's me. That's something. There's another stat that kind of parallels this that we got recently. I can remember the actual numbers. 71% of brands have deployed a chatbot. And this is near and dear and sad for you to hear. So 71% of brands have deployed a chatbot. 16% of consumers will use them on a regular basis. So the rest of the world has tried it, played with it, got fed up, don't want anything to do with them anymore, or they'll give it a try occasionally. But and I think those high numbers that a company has, if I'm spending my day justifying my existence by saying how good I'm doing, and to your point, I go find metrics to measure it, and then I tell my management about it, I believe it. I just think this is really powerful because it is the inconvenient reality behind what actually happens with this stuff.
Well, I'm not really surprised by the stats you're sharing. Saddened is not really the word either. I see the improvement, however. But you know what? Let's not get into chatbots quite yet, because I think that's one of our upcoming topics. However, I do have something else for you, or should I say, I believe you do have something else for me. It's time for a brand new section.
Now it's time to open this week's mailbag.
So what do you have for us this week?
I got something for us this week. I like how the little thing said, what have you got for us this week? Late last year, I did 2 separate episodes around a trip I took to Italy in the fall.
You did?
One was about a friend of mine who had a fall and ended up having to go to the emergency room, and how unlike the United States experience that was. And then also I just talked about going out to dinner and that customer experience. And he heard that and he followed up with a couple of extra thoughts. So I thought I'd share some of that. I like it because we got 2 episodes here to kind of weave together. And we talked about this a little bit in the podcast, but he just really thought it was so important to mention that, the thing I spoke about in the podcast was how incredible the experiences we had dining in Italy. And, just the care and the love and the energy that went into all of this. And you don't really get that in the US. We ate together, we had a wonderful experience, and it was a good restaurant and they cared, but there just wasn't that sense of, oh my God, this is my life to share with you, that you kind of get. And he said, when we were there, somebody took us on a tour of the building they were in, because it was built in the 1400s and there were catacombs and things like that. And there was a picture of the family that ran the restaurant, and over the time we were there, we saw all of that family there. So there's just a deep cultural difference there. And I just think it's something to strive for and have. And he just brought up how personal it was. I think his point was it's personally deeper than we even talked about it being, which I think is very true. And then the other points he made were around the other episode, just reiterating. He said he's 3 different times. They said, okay, you can go now. And 3 different days he started to leave and he came back and said, wait, I can't really go yet, right? Don't I have an hour of paperwork to do that? The story was he fell, he hit his head, he got some stitches. And they after that, they just said, okay, see you later, thanks. And, here in the US, it would be a stack of paper this big that you had to go through before you could do anything. And then there'd be 3 different people to bill. And so just the wonderfulness of that. And the other thing I think was really important to me personally, he had my back on the Uffizi. We went to the Uffizi and I tried to get tickets ahead because it's scheduled and there's limited number of seats and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I went to do it, and I needed to get everyone's full name and birth date, including middle name. And I don't know your middle name. It's so fortunately they were there. I was able to get all that, and then it didn't work. And he had my back that it really didn't work. He tried it too. I tried it from the mobile app, and finally we just gave up. He reminded me that if it was up to me, we wouldn't have gone to it was so painful. And then we got there and we went up to the entrance and they said, oh, the ticket office, it's down this block and over around. And we went down there, and the sign for it was pretty small and I didn't see it. I was just, I don't even want to go. I'll show. I'm going to teach Italy. I'm not going to go to the museum I want to go to. That'll teach them. And he was a little more persistent than I. So he kind of I walked into a store and he just snuck off and got the tickets. He said they didn't ask any of those questions. They're just like, okay, here are your tickets. Have fun. I just said, why? What? So he was, again, marveling at the ridiculousness of some of these requirements.
Well, I had very recently, I traveled in the US. You and I had a nice dinner. Unfortunately, I caught a pretty bad cold in the airplane. So by the time I landed, I was not feeling well at all. And thinking about your story in Italy, how well it went, and what is your usual hospital life in the US, I was actually thinking, okay, let me browse the internet a little bit before I book an appointment with a doctor. And just looking at the fees, because by the way, in France, we are complaining because a doctor fee, the basic one for normal standard doctor, is about $28 US, which doesn't seem to ever happen, at least not in California. I don't know how much you pay for a standard consultation, but I'm guessing is north of $100 at least.
So, no, there is the one thing we do well, which is preventative. So if I'm going just to a checkup or a annual physical exam, those sorts of things, actually it's $25. So I'm sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is. That it's called a copay. You don't do that. But if I'm sick and I go, then that's when it gets to 100. So for that, there's insurance will pay a deductible and blah blah blah. But boy, if you don't have insurance.
Yeah, and your French insurance. I mean, I was on a business trip, so maybe my insurance would have worked. I just didn't want to go through the pain of it, so I decided good painkillers would be good enough for the following 4 days. I didn't want to go through that experience. But the wealth of customer experience is a cultural piece. The fact that going to Italy, you experience something completely different, to me is absolutely amazing, because it's about the culture, it's about the expectations as well. Your expectations for hospital and insurances are so low that
they couldn't be lower. That is absolutely true. They could not be lower.
That anything, not even great, not even necessarily good, but just fine, gets you amazed. And on the other hand, your expectation for museums are actually not, they're not even high. But apparently the service you get is so low that you get this gap. And it's just about expectations. And all expectations are built by what? They are built by culture. And that's why it is so interesting that when you speak CX with people, depending on whether you're talking to a Japanese, a French, an American, or an Italian, we just don't see things the same way, because you need to take into account what is the local culture and what are the expectations like locally.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that. That was very true and well said.
So what about we start another session? I wanted to try something with you, and that's, you know what? Let me just show you. That work for you?
That works for me.
Put your thinking caps on. It's time for the CX quiz.
You do realize it's early in the morning for you, and you're going to ask me to think?
No, it's early in the morning for you. It's late at night for me.
Right. You are asking me to think early in the morning,
and that's showing how late, and that's showing how early it is for you. All right, it's a simple question. Right. It's something you can relate to. I'm sure of it. That is a question of world records when it comes to phone. And I just have one question for you. Do you know how long was the longest ever recorded phone conversation between a customer service representative and a customer?
Oh, well, I had
you
one
specifically
that was...
because I vividly remember. I'm gonna make up a number. It's pretty sure that's gonna be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was episode 11 of season 1 of the CX Therapy, and you told me that fantastic story where you had to repair your computer, I believe, and you ended up on the phone for, I want to say 6 hours, with a tech service representative somewhere in India. You talked about camping and holidays and
Yep.
and what else?
Yeah, but at the end of it, we were best friends. And yeah, 6 hours, 8 hours. I don't remember exactly what it was. But yeah, he walked me through completely reformatting and rebuilding the hard drive and reloading the operating system and the whole 9 yards. And I think I paid $35 for it or something like that. It's a wonderful, it was a horrible experience that I had to do it, but it was a wonderful support experience once you accepted that it needed to be done.
So that was 6 hours. Now, what is a world record?
Yeah.
At least the one I've got.
World record. I would think my first guess was going to be 24 hours, but I would think at some point you'd just get too tired. So I'm going to say 18 hours.
Actually, you know what? We may want to double check, because maybe my data is wrong. But I've got 10 hours and 29 minutes. Which honestly, I think is long enough.
It's more than long enough. That's true. Longer than that. No, you're right. Because, I guess I could get handed off to another agent or something. My goodness.
Here is one agent, one customer, right? And that happened with a brand you're probably more familiar with than I am, because I don't think they exist in Europe. But again, I'm not a big, shopping addict. It was with Zappos.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Back in 2012 or 2014, if I recall. And the whole idea here was the values of the company was you need to do everything you can for your customer, and you just don't hang up on them. And until they decide that it's time to hang up, you just keep on going and you keep the conversation flowing. And I mean, almost 11 hours, that's more than I could handle. That tells a lot about the brand. That tells a lot about the customer service representative. That tells a lot about the customer.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if that image is wrong for what that experience was, because that could well have been two people gleefully shopping for
Truly.
10 and a half hours. You know, oh, well, what about this color? And what about, look at that one. And, because that's, you know, that's a lot of what the calls are, is like shopping support. You know, some of it is, I want to ship this and return this or something like that. But I bet it may have started with that, but I bet it morphed into something kind of fun at some point to last.
You know what? If I had not heard your story, I would probably disagree with you. But after hearing that you stay on the phone for over 6 or 8 hours, whatever it was, to fix your computer, I'm ready to believe whatever you feed me. So, all right. Well, you got it almost right, I want to say. You were a little bit too enthusiastic, but maybe they're bigger.
I would argue I was pretty way high, but that's okay. I don't.
So what comes next?
Now that I think about it, it was 10 and a half. I hope that wasn't like the fifth call that rep got that day. I hope that was the very first. You know, they barely got their coffee and they got on that, because that would be
the good thing is you're pretty much done with your shift.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, now we move on to something that we've toyed with a little bit in the past, but we're going to make kind of core to these sessions going forward. We're going to interview a guest.
And now, please welcome this week's guest, a true CX expert.
And I just happen to know how expert this week's CX expert guest is, because our guest is already here. It's you, Julien. You're going to be our first new format guest. So welcome. Good to have you here. And
thank you for having me. That's a very unfamiliar environment, but really glad to be here nonetheless.
Yeah, well, we're, I talked to Julien and he's so excited that you're here. He just can't stand it. But so the way we're going to do these is just talk a little bit to the guest. Ultimately, the guest will have a CX story, much like we normally do. We have for the past 3 years with each other. With you, we're going to do it subtly differently. The first thing we're going to do is just chat with the guest a little bit. So I'm going to just ask you a couple questions. We've been doing this for a long time, and I know a lot of your background from other conversations we've had, but I don't think there's a lot the audience doesn't know. So I thought digging into you a little bit would be a good way to start. And then you've brought us half of 153 problems or whatever it is. So this round, what we thought would be good is you've actually written a book. So we thought we would talk about that instead of just having a specific problem. So are you okay if we just kind of dive in and let's learn all about Julien and the customer experience unearthed?
I'm not sure you want to learn all about Julien, but we can definitely talk about it.
All right. So first thing I want to talk about is my predecessor here at Forrester always liked to say, nobody playing in the playground in 6th grade says, when I grow up, I want to be doing customer experience or customer service or working in a contact center. It's just not a path people grow up having a passion for. They may have a passion for people or taking care of people, but it's something everybody gets to through a winding road. and I know your road has been winding. So I thought, here you are, CCXP, you've written the book on customer experience. But that certainly wasn't out of college. You didn't jump into this. So talk a little bit about your background and how you ended up in this space.
Well, first, I'm going to have to agree entirely with your predecessor. I definitely did not grow up thinking about doing anything CX. Probably didn't even know that CX was a thing. I started my career doing web design, web development, design, moved into marketing by mistake, by luck. I don't know. That was not a career path for me. I got into marketing. And then after years and years of marketing in various industries, I got this opportunity to work for a company that does customer experience. And quite frankly, I was not excited at all about the theme. I was excited about the environment. I was excited about the team. I was excited about the quality of the product. But the industry itself, customer experience, gosh, I mean, who in his right mind think contact center and gets excited? Look at it from the outside. There is really nothing exciting about it. And I really thought that would be a short-term kind of thing. Then I moved into it and I started realizing the wealth of that industry, like how complex things can get, how exciting things can get. I started to see all the bridges between marketing and CX. I had no idea at the time. I mean, for me, marketing was, let's get your brand right, let's build some hype. I had no idea all the bridges that existed. And I must say, the more I learn about customer experience, the more I get excited and passionate about that thing. It definitely didn't come from first grade or third grade or any grade whatsoever. That's really something I picked along the way. But no regret here. That's a fantastic topic to cover.
Yeah. No, I one of the things that gets me about really specifically contact center in this case is you have these groups that are typically cost centers and cost centers with a ton of people. So they're very expensive cost centers. They have a problem. They have all these people doing stuff. And technology is just the greatest answer for them because you can automate processes and that makes it more efficient and that saves you a bunch of money. And oh, by the way, that's better for the customer. We've talked about this over and over. But it just the problem that's so ripe for technology to make a massive difference to. And at the same time, the people buying that technology tend to be very conservative, tend to be, it's your customers. You're not going to mess around. You don't want to experiment. You need to be very careful and thoughtful about how you do it. So there's this tug of war, yin and yang, of these incredibly conservative buyers being feted with this incredibly complex tech. And it just, once you start seeing that dynamic, it just goes on forever. It's just so fun and fascinating and interesting.
That's a fantastic industry. That's a fantastic industry. And not just the tech side. I know that you and I spend a lot of time talking about the tech side of things. Not so much on the couch, actually. We try to stay away from this on the couch. Therefore, we get that two sides of the CX. But there is so much, and I like the fact that you bring up technology because the evolution of technology makes it an ongoing ride. What we were talking about 5 years ago might not be so relevant anymore. I mean, 5 years ago, we didn't have, now all the conversations are about ChatGPT or AI in general and all the variations of AI. 5 years ago, we were talking about chatbots, not necessarily AI. A lot of chatbots back then were still, decision tree driven.
Yes,
and before that,
ouch.
Before that, you poisoned the entire world with your creation of IVR at the time. So I mean, technology within CX is fantastic because it's just changing our lives. It's impacting everyone's life indirectly.
So you got here. I'm going to ask you about your journey here. I did kind of professionally, but physically, and you picked up some family along the way. Why don't you just talk about, you were born in France and you're now in France, but there were a few stops on the way. Why don't you just talk about, as a guy who's lived in a 20-mile radius his whole life, it's kind of interesting to talk to people who had different places to call home.
I grew up in a tiny village at the border between France, Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. The only thing I knew was if I stick around, nothing fantastic is going to happen to me. I'm just going to have the same life forever, and I want to experience something different. So come my study, I had a bachelor degree and was going to do a master, and decided, hey, now it's time to go somewhere else. And I was thinking about going somewhere in Asia, but I had no plan, which is when I met my wife. So decided to follow her, not my wife at the time. I moved to Hong Kong, spent about 10 years there, MBA and multiple jobs. Mostly startups, no big groups at the time. Moved into various industries. I don't know how many industries I've covered. That's pretty crazy. And at the time, I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, which was a child's dream. And Hong Kong, I can't think of a better place to actually start a company than Hong Kong, because they just make it so easy for you. Unlike France, which everything is complex. So started my company, followed it for a couple of years, sold it, moved back to marketing, a little bit of consulting here and there, and decided to come back to France because Hong Kong was a fantastic place when you're young and dynamic and all of that. But once you start thinking about having a family, 30 square meter, 300 square feet, not the best place. No. If you can afford something different. So decided that part of my life was over. Time to move back to France, but not to the tiny village I was coming from. Moved to Paris with the Eiffel Tower.
Yes, there it is.
much sexier for tourists than it is for locals. I guarantee you that. And yeah, here I am. That was a fun journey, but it taught me, moving to Hong Kong told me to be incredibly, it forces you to become mature much faster. Being an entrepreneur forces you to realize the value of money, the value of investment, and not just money investment, but also time investment, which is something that I think most people don't realize until it's too late. You invest most of your time in useless things that bring zero value. And you don't enjoy enough family time, you don't enjoy enough looking at what really brings a return on investment. And again, it's not just about money, but really about getting value. And most importantly, it told me how to speak English, because believe it or not, most of the world does speak English, and when you don't, it's hard to build a career, an international career there. So as a French person, speaking English, I must say, is a life changer.
Yeah. And I'm an American, and I speak American, and you just don't have a lot of exposure to other languages and have not been good about following up on that. So if this was a regular interview, we would be transitioning into your story. And in this case, you do have a story, but it's not a traditional, oh my gosh, I went to the store and this happened, or I called a contact center. But really the start of your story is actually this podcast. So I think maybe, I was thinking about talking to you about this. I started 2 podcasts about 3 years ago with 2 different friends, this one and another one. And the other one, we lasted about a year and we kind of ran out of stuff to talk about. This one hasn't done that and has led to a book and everything because of this whole CX therapy angle and the idea of here's an experience, let's go break it down. And I just, how did you get there to that idea? Because you came to me with that idea pretty fully formed. And, we've talked a little, but I'm not even sure I fully understand how that came to you and where the original seed of this whole podcast came from.
Interestingly, I think the starting point and the reason why we're where we at today are pretty much the same thing. I think there are two things. The first one is a human story. You living in the US, me living in France, I really wanted to make sure we had something together that was ongoing because I didn't want to lose that link. Because it's so easy to tell. I mean, today we have technology. You can keep in touch with people, but how often do you do? Right. Those people you've worked with in the past, how often do you actually talk to them? Probably never, or once in a blue moon because you suddenly think about them. I don't want that. I wanted to make sure you and I had a good reason to stay in touch. And at the time when we started that podcast, we were still working together, and I'm so happy we did it because I'm not sure we would still be talking as regularly if we did.
Yeah, I'm sure we wouldn't.
The first element is a human story. The second element is what I did not see coming was that we could not run out of stories. When you and I started, we said, okay, we have that terrible set of stories. You have bad stories. I have bad stories. Let's go on therapy. Let's call it CX therapy. One after the other, we're going to tell a story and we're going to feel better about this. And I genuinely thought that after 6, 7, 10 episodes would be done. And at the end of the first year, I just realized, wow, we've recorded 52 episodes and we're not running out because we have so many bad customer experiences each and every week. That would never run out of stories. Then the second year came in and we celebrated the 100th episode. And now that we finished a third season with 156 episodes altogether, and we're still not out of content. So I think for as long as customer experience won't be perfect, which I guarantee 100%.
We're pretty safe there.
We can finish both of our careers easy with that topic. I think we're good.
I think we're pretty darn safe there, that's for sure. So one thing I thought real quick would be helpful, obviously this is a new format. Maybe you could just break down how these sessions are going to flow for this year as we do this.
I think it's going to evolve quite a bit. What I'm thinking right now is we're going to have a guest every time. Therefore, we're not going to do a weekly session anymore. We're going to turn it into a monthly session. That's going to require a little bit more work. I mean, we just need to keep the lights on, right? So it does require some work. I want to invite someone on the couch that is neither you nor me moving forward. And I want to be able to have these stories, continue analyzing them, because that's a real DNA of this show. But I also want to have some statistics, some quiz. I want to keep the mailbag, because I just imagine you with your bag on the back, like beautiful CX Santa. I think we need to keep some of that. And I want as much fun as possible, because at the end of the day, we're not making $1 with that, but we're having a lot of fun, and that's really what I'm looking forward to each and every week. So that should be our new format for 2024.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wanted to capture that a little bit today. So we've had 156 bitch sessions, I'll call them, and we do have the occasional happy story.
Sure.
But so over time, these add up into something bigger, and that really is why you were able to write a book based on all of this. So what were the patterns you started to see over time when you started to say, hey, let's look at this more generally and get some learning here? What were the patterns you saw? How did this start to shape?
I'm not sure it started this way. I think at the end of the second year, we started thinking about there could be more to that. And I started looking into what were all these stories about. Because I had that feeling that we had wealth of content that was just untapped. Because yes, we have these weekly stories, but beyond the recording itself, we do nothing with it. So I thought that we could make a book out of this. And before doing so, I watched 156 episodes, started taking notes, keywords, hashtags, whatever you want to call it. This episode is about this episode is about that. These are the solutions we suggested. These are the pitfalls that we have analyzed. These are the industries that we've covered, all of these things. And I'm a really analytical kind of guy where I love spreadsheets. So I put everything in a spreadsheet and start seeing, keywords that come over and over again. And you're right, there started to be some very clear patterns. And we could easily organize these patterns around the customer journey. But also the issues that we were seeing could very easily be organized around top pillars. Trying not to forget anything, on top of my head, I think we can cover 4 pillars. There is one about the complete lack of proactivity. This is a topic we've been covering over and over again. We did not even realize we were covering it because all stories were completely unrelated with one another. But lack of proactivity in communication is an ongoing story. We have multiple stories that are talking about the complete lack of understanding of what the customer effort score is all about. Because it's not just about handling a problem, that's about considering how much of an effort you're asking your customer, and it's also about understanding whether there is a fair scale, a fair balance between the effort you're asking for and the reward that the customer is getting. So sometimes it's not crazy to ask for a lot of effort because the reward is just worth it.
Sure.
And sometimes you're asking for crazy things and the customer is getting nothing in return. So
or a $10 gift certificate, as I got one time.
Exactly, right? So, but on the other hand, you also had that beautiful experience with Indian immigration, where even allowing you to enter the territory was just not sufficient to justify the crazy hoops you had to jump through.
Yeah, there was a lot of pain there, that's for sure. Technology has, as we said a few minutes ago, technology has so deeply changed the customer experience. But the customer journey is still the customer journey. The problems are still the problems. If you don't deploy the technology thoughtfully in the right way, you create the same problems. So maybe talk, I don't know why this example is coming up. No matter how you deliver a survey, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, but the only score you can give it is 7 to 10, technology isn't going to change that one way or the other. So what is just the human part and what's the technology part?
I think they both go hand in hand. I'm a huge believer in technology, but I'm very realistic when it comes to technology, meaning technology can allow you to do greater things. But if you don't have the right human touch and processes in place, technology is going to be worthless. I mean, I think you can do more with the right processes than you could do with the right technology. Because the processes are basically the foundation on everything. So with the right people, you build the right culture. You get people to be customer-centric, to think for themselves, to be empowered, and therefore to pick the technology that's going to help them going over and beyond. If you start with technology, you get fancy tools with millions of features that could do everything from the floor to the ceiling. But if you don't have people to run it, it's just a gigantic waste of money and time. So I think technology is an enabler. It's fantastic. What we can do nowadays with technology is absolutely amazing. But it does not replace the foundation, which is to have the right culture, the right people, the right processes.
why don't you pick one? You mentioned the journey. Why don't you pick one step of the journey and just kind of walk through what that how that chapter flows and what some of the learnings you saw were?
So the structure of the book is pretty simple. It actually came naturally. I had no idea how to structure it. And then as I started recounting the stories, it became very obvious that there was one way to do it. Basically, each chapter is covering one specific step of the customer journey. We start with browsing. That is a step that is so often forgotten by customer experience, but it's completely part of the experience. It's how people perceive your brand, see your ads, what they feel about your products and all of this before they even buy anything, how they compare your products with competitors. And then you go to the purchase step, the actual, purchase of the product, usage of the product, the delivery, the customer service, after the actual sale and all this. And even some other customer journey steps that are not set in stone, but kind of touching everything else, like the quality of communication or the quality of process. Now, within each of the sections, I give very concrete, real-life stories from our CX therapy couch. And again, we don't lack content. If anything, we had too much content, and I had to do a lot of filtering to only focus on what really was the most relatable. And I took 40 stories, organized it in 7 chapters. Then for each chapter, I go through between 4 and 5 stories in average, explain why the story matters, what are the learnings, how could you do things better, what is the impact for the business, what is the impact for the customer. And at the end of each chapter, trying to collate all the most concrete, most applicable tips and suggestions that would actually work for most companies out there. Keeping in mind that every company is different from one industry to the other, or going back to the cultural element we talked about earlier, from one country to the other. Everything needs to be adapted. There is no one solution fits all. You read the book, you apply it tomorrow morning, and your company is going to be different. That's just not how it works. But at least it gives you food for thought to know, how can I apply these learnings to my own company so my customers benefit from it?
It's interesting how powerful just using, it's almost like we're using customer experiences as a metaphor and a point of entry into a discussion. And it's become a really powerful thing, which, congrats on the book. I think it's really awesome that you've done this. So
I owe you a lot, so thank you very much for that, Max. I wrote it, but it's your stories and my stories. It's 3 years of pain and laughs and laughter. Yeah. So thank you for everything.
Very well, thank you very much. So this is kind of our first run at the new format, and next month, again, part of the format changes, we're going to do monthly instead of weekly. Next month, we will have a guest who is not Max and Julien, and it will be this format we just did in terms of the different sections, etc. But we'll have someone else here who is an expert in the industry. Looks like we'll have somebody we've spoken with before who we both love and enjoy talking to and think highly of. So I think it'll be good. I don't want to tease out names yet. And this time it'll be like today, except instead of talking about the podcast and the book, we'll be talking about this person's experience, and we'll do a breakdown kind of like we have 156 times before. So I'm excited and looking forward to it. And thank you, Julien, for being our guinea pig guest, and I'll leave you with the final word for today.
Oh, a big thank you, Max. Love to be back. Love the new format. Hopefully we'll still fine-tune it. I think there are still a few things that we can do better. But love the new format. Love to see you again in 2024. Really looking forward to the next session with a guest. Thank you for the teaser. And with that, I think we can wish everyone have a happy evening, morning, afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are. and we'll see you all in a month's time. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.